Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gil Eapen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gil@eapen.info. My guest today is Professor George Markowsky, who is a professor and former chair of computer science at the Missouri University of Science and Technology, where he runs a cyber society lab. He was chair and professor of computer science at the University of Maine, a visiting scholar at the Rochester Institute of Technology, a visiting professor at RPI, and a manager of special projects in the computer science department of IBM's Watson Research Center. His research interests are theoretical methods in computer science and the impact of computers on society. Welcome, George.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to start with one of your older papers, it was relevant then. It is increasingly relevant now, I think. So it's entitled Crowdsourcing, Big Data, and Homeland Security. And in that paper, you discuss ways that crowdsourcing could help homeland security, and you review some successes and possibly some failures in this area. You want to talk a bit about that?
Sure, be happy to. Do you just want me to talk?
Yeah. So, what is the paper about? How could big data and crowdsourcing specifically help in the homeland security arena?
Well, one of the things, just some way I was picturing this as an extension of the neighborhood watch.
Yeah.
A lot of us kind of rely on our neighbors. Like, for example, if you have good neighbors and you're going away for a vacation trip or something, you might just mention to your neighbor, we're going to be out of town for a week. Could you just keep an eye? That way, or if you're going to be away, but you're going to have some people come work on the house, you tell your neighbor, okay, These aren't burglars, that sort of thing. So in particular, one of the things that got me thinking a lot about this was the Boston Marathon bombing.
Right.
And within a relatively short time, people were able to identify the culprits and track them down. And a lot of that happened because, this store had a video camera and there was some other footage that was put together from various places. Okay, so they were able to identify where the blast came. They were able to track some of these people, and then other people recognized some of the grainy shots. So there was a lot of information that came from the community to identify the perpetrators. There was another case that happened in the subway station in New York City, where a thug attacked a woman and stole her purse, but he had a very distinctive sweatshirt, and the police had no leads, weren't totally unable to find them. But when they posted the picture within like half a day, people said, "Oh, that's so and so,"
Yeah.
and they
But
were led to it. So the idea is, and again, I think what I always worry about is building a big brother kind of society where people are just trying to suppress other people. And so the idea is, how do you find that balance between people helping each other, especially in terms of thwarting terrorism or crime, but at the same time without creating an oppressive atmosphere, where they're paid informers and the government has informers everywhere who are interested in thought control. So that's kind of the background of what the paper discussed.
So one thing I was thinking about, George, the social networks now. I want to get your perspective on this. There are a lot of bots on it. There are a lot of fake news and fake, information on it. So, would we sort of run out of this type of utility as we go forward? Where are we in terms of real information on social networks nowadays?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I'm not sure that there is a really great answer. Although one of the things that I think of, I think it goes back to me anyway, the ideal of the educated person. In other words, even if you look at fake news and things like that, oftentimes if you just stand back and think about it, a lot of it just doesn't make any sense,
Right.
And so I think that what I'm hoping is that we can get people who are really thinking and not just saying, "Oh, I heard this thing repeated here and then it was repeated here again and repeated there, so therefore it must be true because it's been repeated in 10,000 places."
Yeah. So you would say, George, then, from a homeland security perspective, the users of this information will be sophisticated enough to really read through information fairly quickly to get to the right information.
Yeah, in other words, like, for example, if somebody reports, a unicorn was sighted on Main Street, okay,
Yeah.
Now that could be picked up by trolls and repeated 10,000 times,
Right.
And so you might want to say, well, look, an educated person knows there are no unicorns, so whatever was sighted on Main Street, maybe it was something unusual, but it was most certainly not a unicorn.
Or very, very low probability of it.
Low probability, exactly.
Right.
Like, it reminds me of a funny story. I was talking to somebody who was working as a ranger in a park in Maine.
Yeah.
And he said that one time some tourists came rushing excitedly to him to report that there was an alligator in the river.
Mm.
Okay, now you don't have to know a whole lot about Maine other than to know it's pretty far north and it's cold.
Right.
And the probability of there being an alligator in the Maine River is extremely low.
Mm.
And so this tourist, had the tourist thought about it even for a minute, would not have rushed off to the ranger to report an alligator in the river. So I think there are all kinds of fakes and photo fakes, and lots of times, that old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably not true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there is an element of common sense that if we could get people, even not like be real educated, it's not that like you have to be an expert on something, but you can use common sense. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, is somebody really, I don't know, have a $3 billion worth of golds in the trunk of their car or something like that? It's not physically possible.
It's what I worry about is really the pictures and videos and things like that, right? So with artificial intelligence techniques now, you can make them make them, almost undifferentiable, in many ways, right? So they, so to kind of filter through that requires a level of understanding
Hmm.
that may not be there. I would think maybe 80-85% of the population.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Hollywood makes a living out of just selling things that are physically impossible. Yeah,
Yeah.
like for example, if you take these superheroes or something, I mean, they violate tons of laws of physics. Um, I mean, take even for example, the nice cartoon of Frozen, right?
Yeah.
Where the princess sort of waves her hand and creates these gigantic snow structures and whatever. I mean, the amount of energy that she would be consuming would just turn her into a crisp. you know,
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's no way a human body could handle that amount of energy, or so even aside from people trying to fake people,
Mhm.
we live in a world of just kind of nonsense.
Make believe.
Yeah, for entertainment. Like you go on and there are all these paranormal shows and aliens and whatnot. Now I'm not saying there isn't life on other planets, but really, I mean, physics is a very established discipline. You know,
Right. And
we
so your argument, George, is that if I understand this correctly, there is so much information out there. Information is being collected in a massive fashion today, and you can actually see the positive effects of some of this in the recent racial type issues that we have seen.
have.
And so what you're arguing is that we should have some sort of a system, a process that can bring all that information to some sort of a central processing type thing. Is that how you would think about it?
Well, yeah, or for example, it doesn't always have to be central.
Yeah,
The whole idea of community watch
yeah,
is that it's not necessarily that there's a commander of the community watch. There are a series of volunteers who, if something happens, they'll call a central location like a police department.
yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's not always the same person. It's whoever happens to be home, whoever happens to look out a window. It's the sort of thing that, like, for example, let's say you live in the neighborhood and you glance out and you happen to see your neighbor's 2-year-old kid just walking down the street. Now, you probably imagine that something happened. Somebody left the door open or whatever, but a responsible person would rush out there and try to get the kid off the street.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
right.
That's what we're talking about. Is it's not necessarily, it's not like you would call up some department and say, "Oh, there's a kid on the street," and then forget about it because the kid could get run over. You know what I mean?
Right.
You would want people to take action. Now, getting back to the fake information, I think it really points out the importance of educating people so that they understand something about their world, about what's logical, what's not logical, how people behave, and things like that. And when they're being fed lies and things like that, a lot of people just kind of accept what's given to them. And what I think is important is to cultivate a more critical attitude. Like, is this possibly true? How can I verify this? Okay. So in other words, like, not just, from some websites or Facebook pages because people can control it. Is there some other way that I can verify this?
Yeah.
Like if 5 different new networks are all reporting exactly the same thing, or 6 different newspapers, or cultivating a more skeptical attitude, I think, is important.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it's if decision making is going to be distributed, in terms of partial information,
Mm-hmm.
then educated society would become a necessary requirement for that to work. I mean, we can already see issues with that, right? People calling police departments because they find somebody of color in the park,
Mhm.
and so if we cannot get to an educated society, then we cannot. I feel like we cannot really have distributed decision making in the presence of information.
Well, I think that's always been the ideal in the American dream. That's why we have public education. In theory, public education is necessary to prepare people to be full participants in a democratic state.
Yeah.
And I think that obviously we need to do, I think, a better job than we've done so far. And
Right.
in some ways, it may be that the COVID-19 is causing people to rethink education. Like, what are the key components? What can you do online as opposed to in person? And a lot of questions like that. And maybe we can come up with some new answers and sort of revitalize education.
I want to just touch on another paper briefly, George. The problem of interceptor top level domains.
Yes,
So top level domains are things like .com, .net, .org, things like that, right?
correct.
And so what's the issue here?
Well, the issue here is that at one point when the internet started out, there were just a very small number of top level domains. There were .com, .net, .org, .edu was there at the beginning, like you said. But then they started proliferating. So, for example, each country got a domain. Okay, so there's .us,
UK, yeah.
.ca, and whatnot. Now,
Right.
some of those have purpose. For example, Colombia, the country of Colombia, sold its two-letter domain .co is now available for commercial
Okay.
use. So the idea is that there are now, last time I checked, and it's probably more now, there were over, I think, 1,700 top-level domains.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And a lot of them are very similar. Like, for example, there was a top-level domain .career, and there's a top-level name .careers with an S. The only difference is career versus careers. So let's say you have a company and you do career or counseling or something, and you call yourself Smith.career. Well, someone who's unscrupulous might set up Smith.careers,
right,
and hope, or vice versa, and hope that some of the email that goes to Smith.career, the person accidentally types careers or forgets to type DS or whatever. And now you can get all the email, and you can set up your account in such a way that anything to anybody.career, if they type careers, will come to you.
Right. Yeah. So who decides on these TLDs? What's the mechanism there, George?
Well, the mechanism is basically you have to pay a bunch of money to an organization that oversees this called ICANN.
Yeah.
And they really, in my opinion, have not done a good job in trying to prevent people from registering very similar domain names. So, for example,
you could, So if you're Microsoft, you could technically call ICANN and create a TLD.MSFT.
Yep.
And so it just takes a pot of money. That's all.
Right, and technically they sort of review it that it doesn't cause problems. But my opinion, I have this whole long report where what I do is, like, if you look at a top level domain, it'll tell you which ones are just like one letter off. Okay, so for example, you're familiar with the top level domain edu.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the European Union has a top level domain .eu.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Now you can imagine that somebody either, meant to type EU, but is so used to typing EDU, or there's auto completion or something, that they send it to something with the same name, but it's either an EDU as opposed to EU. Or what I could do is, if say I am you have to be a European citizen to register .eu,
Yeah.
but I could register Harvard.eu.
I see. Yeah.
Okay, so now some student is applying or thinks they're applying to Harvard.edu, but they make a typo, and we all make typos, so we know how that's like. And instead, they send this email to Harvard.eu. And I could have some kind of fake site there that could, cheat them or mislead them or something. There was one case in the paper where it was supposed to go to GS. There was an actual case that ended up in court because somebody had the wrong top-level domain and sent confidential papers to the wrong person, and then tried to retrieve it. So
would you suggest then, George, some sort of a rationalization of that 1,700 TLDs out there? That is the solution?
Well, that's one solution. The other thing I suggest is I had this report that people, before they register a name, they might look at other, in other words, like if you were going to register Smith.career, you might also want to register Smith.careers.
Right. But that becomes expensive for, startups and things like that.
Well, it could be, but the idea of the report is it shows you which top-level domains are close to other top-level domains.
Okay.
So for example, if you're going to register Smith.career, it's not going to cost you that much more to register both Smith.career and Smith.careers. But you don't have to register Smith.cycling club.
Yeah.
Okay, because nobody's going to confuse cycling club with career, but they might confuse careers in career. Similarly, there was like engineering and engineers and engineering. So the idea is that you look at the domains that might be confused, and to protect yourself, because no one else is going to protect you, you register domain names that might be potentially confusing. But a lot of people don't even realize that the potential exists.
Right. Yeah, so that's interesting. So anybody could create a TLD. They don't really have a monopoly over that TLD. Once they pay ICON and they creates it, then anybody could use that TLD with their name. Right.
Well, here's the thing. The person who creates the TLD controls it. So if you want to, like, for example, if I said a TLD, say radio, anybody who wants to register .radio would have to come to me, and I would charge them whatever I want. Okay, so it's a business. People register domains for various reasons, like in some cases, I think there are a couple of like NYC or New York City or something like that, that like restaurants and hotels and stuff, when we had active restaurants and hotels, would consider registering those, for advertising purposes. So the idea is that there are legitimate reasons, like for example, somebody might want to help promote hotels, so they might register the top level domain name .hotel. Okay. Then whoever wants to have, like, say, you had an inn, like Old Faithful Inn, and then you could register Old Faithful Inn .hotel.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But you have to pay the TLD owner some amount.
You have to pay the TLD owner, and some TLD owners charge a lot, and like .com is relatively inexpensive, but there are TLDs that are, hundreds of dollars, and there's some TLDs that are restricted. Like, for example, to get a .us, you have to be a citizen of the US. At .eu, you have to be a citizen of the European Union. So there are a lot of country domains that you have to, you know, if you want a registered domain, you have to be a citizen of that country. Others are available to anybody, like .com, .net, .org, available to anybody in the world. .edu is restricted to educational institutions in the
Right.
U.S.
Yeah. So what you're suggesting, George, if I understand this correctly, you can create a little program taking into account all the 1,700 TLDs out there. And if somebody wants to register a domain with a TLD, you can get some guidance as to what is close to that,
Right.
and essentially get all of those in one shot.
Yeah. See, like, for example, even IBM, let's say,
Yeah.
doesn't have registrations in all 1,700 categories, but they certainly have IBM.com. They probably have IBM.co because it's close, it's one letter off, you know, and then of course IBM probably has in different countries where, you know, so like if there's IBM Canada, they probably have IBM.ca, you know, things like that.
Okay.
But even IBM, like I was, as part of the experiment, I think I was able to register like IBM-USA.com or something like that, which is confusingly close.
Right. Yeah, that it's a problem, and I don't know what the long-term solution might be. I want to jump into another paper, George.
Sure.
It's entitled "The Metric at the End of the Rainbow," in which
Right.
you say it is common to see statements such as the following: defining effective information security metrics has proven difficult, even though there is general agreement that such metrics could allow measurement of progress in security measures and, at a minimum, rough comparisons of security between systems. However, general community agreement on meaningful metrics has been hard to achieve. This is due to in part to the rapid evolution of IT, as well as the shifting focus of adversarial action. And you're basically arguing here is that there are no metric that you can measure that sort of takes all the information in, right?
Yeah, I mean, people have this belief that they can take, you know, this fact and this fact and this fact and some other fact and come up with a consistent way that it all boils down to number, you know. Yeah. So that I do this, and this gives me a security score of 70. But if I do some other collection of things, it gives me a score of 72, and 72 is better than 70, so I'm more secure than that person. And what I'm saying is that, you know, I back it up with some mathematical arguments. It's related to something known as Arrow's theorem, is that basically you have to figure out what your basic criteria is, what your one factor is, and then you can rate things. But if you try to incorporate 6 different things, you're essentially either going to have an inconsistent measure, or it's really going to be dominated by one of those things.
Right. Yeah, one of the things, you know, there's obviously math here. One of the things that I find it kind of amusing is that you say you can apply Arrow's theorem to the effect that the only method that produces a logically consistent choice from a group of logically consistent people in an election context is to appoint a dictator that let that person make all the choices. We have many democracies around the world that's close to this now. So what's the argument there? Can we talk about it in less mathematical ways?
Yeah, I mean, the basic thing is, and well, you can see it in practice. Okay, if you have a democracy and you have lots of opinions, people sort of point out, well, you know, sometimes you have logically inconsistent results. And the answer is yes, you know, because, you know, one set of factors gets weighed, you come up with one decision, then other people come in, they have other factors, and you change the decision. I mean, look at your own life. I mean, like you're trying to decide something. I mean, how many of us have struggled with, well, gee, if I do this, it looks like it's a good idea. If I do this, it looks like a bad idea.
Yeah.
You know, and so the idea is just that we have to understand that decision making, especially if it has complex parameters, that we can't really all factor them in unless there's like a common measure. Like people love rankings, right? They all these college rankings and stuff. But if you boil them down, you'll see that probably a lot of them really relate to the size of the endowment or the student faculty ratio or something like that. But they'll come in and they'll tell you, oh, you know, we factored in these 60 things. But the answer is, no, you haven't. You've either taken those 60 things and all reduced them to a particular scale.
Right.
You know, where we're going to give so many points for your student faculty ratio, or we're going to, you know, so there's this abstract scale. So you basically have taken all the parameters and reduced them to one.
Right.
Or
arbitrarily. So, you know, this happens in, as you know, big companies all the time. You know, senior decision makers will say, hey, I can deal with more than two numbers. And so you guys have to go get, you know, the 1,500 different things that you measure and then drive it down to two numbers so that I can make a decision.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's not how it works. In fact, it's impossible.
Right.
You can't that any sort of ranking system, ultimately there's something that dominates the decision. Okay.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I was trying to do is not to say, well, you can't make decisions, but the point is you have to look at a situation and say, you know, what is the dominant factor? Okay. Like when 9/11 happened, okay, you know, people said, oh, you know, we can look at this, we can look at that. But why were the targets selected? Well, to some extent, they were selected because they were symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to damage the reputation, the image of the United States. They didn't really care about economic disruption per se. They hit the World Trade Center, the Pentagon. They tried to hit the White House, right?
Right.
Okay. Because those were very visible symbols. So even I don't know if you remember, but around that time, there were these cases of sniper shootings.
Yeah.
And then everybody said, oh, you know, it's Al Qaeda, this and that. And I was pretty sure, and I would tell people, I don't think it's Al Qaeda, because that's not the way Al Qaeda, they don't cause disruption by shooting unknown people in parking lots.
Right.
That's just not the way they do it. They cause disruption with big symbolic attacks. They would much rather take down the World Trade Center than shoot 20 people in random parking lots of stores in suburbia.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's the point. The point is you have to understand the situation, figure out what the dominant factors are, and then build your analysis on this. But if what you're saying is give me thousands and thousands of pieces of data, and I'm gonna, you know,
just boil it down to
one number,
which is completely ad hoc and completely arbitrary. So what you're saying, almost, George, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you're going to do that, it's really no point doing it. You might as well just, you know, you just appoint somebody who says yes or no and just go with it.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just saying that you need to think about it. Like, for example, all right, you see this thing like people are all talking about machine learning and, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But the big knock on a lot of machine learning is that you can't explain why it makes the decisions. Okay.
It's a black box. Yeah.
It's a black box. But more than that, what it does is it essentially memorizes lots of configurations, and then it gives you one that's sort of, so if you ask it like, what is this pattern, it gives you a close match to a pattern it's seen before, but it doesn't really understand
Right.
what the factor is. In other words, like when people are saying, well, we want to do this in a logical way, so here are our principles and here we're going to make the decision, that's not what machine learning does. Machine learning says, oh, I've looked at 100,000 examples, and this one is the closest to what you're showing me. So I'm going to say it's closest to this one.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you ask it, well, why did it pick that one? The answer is, well, nobody knows. It's buried somewhere in the neural network that picked that out. There was some kind of similarity but that's also why they can be fooled.
Easily, yeah. Right.
Even with facial recognition, if I just put like a plus on my cheek, it suddenly thinks that I'm somebody else,
Right. Yeah, so it's very brittle. And so this is not in the paper, but I want to get your perspective. A lot of excitement around artificial intelligence. We have been here before. Where do you think AI is heading? Are we getting better? What's your prediction, let's say 5-10 years into the future?
Well, there's no doubt we're getting better.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly machines can solve all kinds of problems that they couldn't solve before. I mean, back around 1980, I worked with voice recognition systems, and they were very difficult. You had to extensively train people, and you got spotty results. I mean, now most people can call on the telephone, some kind of voice system, and say numbers and some simple commands without any training. Even people, who have non-standard pronunciation and things like that can often be understood.
Right.
So practically, we've come a long way, for sure.
Yeah. But do you think, so the brittleness that you just described, the brittleness of those systems seems to me it's also increasing. So there is almost sort of a parallel path to defeat it as well.
Yeah, there is. And I think that what we need to understand is how do we, I mean, that's one of the things I'm trying to comprehend is how do we live with the machines?
Right.
Like for example, no one would go back to horse and buggies, or at least very few people would go back to horse and buggies.
Yeah.
And so we've accepted that, and we found a way to incorporate automobiles into our lives, even though we suffer quite a few casualties. I mean, tens of thousands of people die every year because of the automobile. But we've kind of decided as a society that I guess it's worth it.
Yeah.
But now we're also trying to make self-driving cars, and in my opinion, I think we will get to cars that, at least if they're not totally driving the car, can make driving a car a lot simpler.
And a lot safer.
Yeah, a lot simpler and a lot safer. Yeah. So, for example, if you get into a car and you're drunk, if the car can detect that and refuses to move, that could have a huge improvement in the safety record of automobiles. So I think the question is, how do we use machines so that they really help us without being misused by, for evil purposes? Like people are, now talking about, well, you can implant these sensors that can, like if a person's paralyzed, you can connect the brain back to the paralyzed muscles and the person gets motion. But if you also use that same technology for brainwashing people or controlling people, then I'm not sure I'm so excited about that. The same thing with the facial recognition. I don't really care for the spying on people. When people say, oh, it's this great thing, you come in the store and it recognizes your face and it knows you want to buy diapers or something for your kid.
Yeah.
it kind of passes from being useful to being creepy.
Yeah, but I wonder if it's unavoidable, though, George. If we are on this track, we cannot. I believe we cannot selectively, let it do certain things, but not others.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think we can certainly try to have some input into it. The question is ultimately, will we be successful? I don't know, but I believe we should try.
Yeah. I want to jump into a talk that you had, which is very topical, and that's about COVID-19 modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite amazing that we cannot go through all the math, but it's quite amazing that these models are reasonably predictive, and it appears to me that it's giving you fairly good heuristics from a policy perspective that you could deploy, right? So it's the SIR model. You want to describe that a bit?
Yeah, models. I think people need to understand that what a model does is it allows you to test certain assumptions. So if you make assumptions, you can see what the consequences will be if those assumptions are correct, and that can guide your policy. Okay, so what I think people need to understand is that it's not that the model is like an oracle that knows the future.
Yeah.
It just says that if you make these assumptions, these are the logical consequences.
Most likely outcome.
Yeah. In other words, this is what's likely going to happen.
Right.
Now, oftentimes models need to have a simplification just because you can't handle all the
SIR model. So you're looking at sort of three different compartments there, right?
Right. It's the simplest model that you can have, and you have three groups, S, I, and R. And S is the group of susceptible people. These are the people who could be infected. And I are the people who are infectious, not infected, but infectious. In other words, these are the people who can give it to someone.
So they're infected, but they're not really showing any symptoms. They could be asymptomatic, but they're infectious.
This model does not address symptoms.
Right.
All it says is you are in the S category if you can catch it.
Right.
You're in the I category if you can give it to someone.
Mm-hmm.
And you're in the R category if you have gotten to the point where you can't catch it and you can't give it to someone.
Yeah.
So what you can, so it's susceptible, infectious, and recovered. Now, recovered is kind of a strange term because recovered includes people who died.
Right.
Because they can't infect anybody, but we would, in normal usage, would not call them recovered.
Right.
So you can augment the model by adding, say, a D category of people who died.
But it shouldn't really matter, right, from a mechanics.
Well, yeah. I mean, in this, what you're trying to do is just see how the flow goes from people infected. At which point does it stop? Does the whole population become infected? Does it get to a certain point? Okay. Now, again, in such a model, you have to make assumptions like what's the likelihood that if someone is infectious, that they will actually infect a person? How many people? Now, clearly, if you look at people, different people see different numbers of other people per day. Like some people maybe have a job where they just sit and program in a room and they don't see anybody all day. Other people are out there mixing with lots of people.
Yeah.
We don't have the capability of modeling each person's steps, so we make an average. We say, well, assume a person sees 10 other people per day.
So you have set of assumptions in these boxes, and essentially you have people flowing from S to I to R.
Exactly.
And you also have, sort of policy. You could change these assumptions, right? For instance, if you have a lockdown, a national lockdown, you can probably substantially affect the I bucket, right?
Yeah. In other words, if infectious people don't see
Yeah,
anybody, okay, they cannot then infect anybody.
right.
And so in the paper, I show how these different measures affect the different constants, and you get different results. Okay, the number of people who end up being infected goes down, and it also shows that if you use, say, you follow some of these policies, you get the infection rate down, but then you just relax them too early, then you get an explosion, and it's as if you hadn't done anything.
Right. And then
Because,
once you have the explosion, pulling back is really difficult as well, right?
well, it depends how long the
Yeah.
explosion
Yeah.
goes. You see, that's where I made the model, and I also even put it in a spreadsheet format so that people can like
Play around with it. Yeah.
play around with it and say, okay, if I do this for 3 days, and then I do this for 6 days, and then I do this for 4 days, what will I have? And then it draws the graph for you.
Yeah.
So the whole point of the model is to give people a simple tool. And by the way, they can download it from my website if they want to play with this. I have it both as a Python program and an Excel spreadsheet, so you don't really have to be very mathy to plug the numbers
Yeah.
in and see what happens. And I have a couple of samples, and you could see that there's just a lot of variation. And the model can be very instructive to help people understand why certain things work and why other things don't work. So, for example, the lockdown, that reduces the number of people you see per day.
Right.
Social distancing reduces, the transmission. It's like if you stay 6 feet away or 10 feet away, it becomes less and less likely that you can infect someone.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you plug those assumptions in, you'll see how the results depend and how they vary, and then you can make your decision on that. Now, that's not a professional level model that, like, if you go to epidemiology
Epidemiology. Yeah.
departments where they have much more detailed things like, people in this neighborhood see so many people, and we have all these restaurants here, so that the contacts in this area are going to be greater. And that isn't what this SIR model does. This is a very crude that says we have 3 categories of people. Okay. And it just makes an assumption on the likelihood that people get infected. Now, we know, for example, or at least in terms of fatality rate, that COVID-19 affects people at different ages with a different level of ferocity. So if you have a group of 80-year-olds and a group of 60-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 20-year-olds, they're all going to have different outcomes in terms of how many get infected and how many recover and all of that. And that's not in the model. The model just assumes, okay, each person is the same as every other person, and here's the probability of infection.
Yeah. So even this macro model, George, you have some very interesting observations from it, right? So, for example, you say the model very clearly illustrates the value of testing and quarantine, distancing, social isolation, and washing your hands and not touching your face. So those interventions that that people have been talking about right from the beginning of this pandemic are all very important, and all of those, like you say, is going to reduce the growth in the middle bucket, in the I bucket, right? And
Right.
so what you're saying here is also, it also illustrates the flattening the curve is extremely important, and sort of a lack of speed, right? So if you sort of step back and wait and see approach to it, take a wait and see approach to it, that's going to kill you because you're essentially dealing with sort of an exponential process, aren't you?
Right. Yeah. In other words, when it takes off, it can take off very rapidly.
Yeah.
You know, and people tend to think of more that most processes are linear. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like if I have 10 people sick today, tomorrow I'm going to have 11 people, then I'm going to have 12 people, then I'm going to have 13 people. But with this thing, it can go from 10 to 20 to 40 to 100 to 200 like
Yeah.
that. So in 5 days, you've suddenly gone from 10 people to 200,
Right.
as opposed to from 10 people to 20.
Right. And so, given where we are today, George, what is, in conclusion, what is your sort of prediction as to how effective we are going to be? We know what the run rates are in these buckets now. Certain states have done it really well in the tri-state area, where the pandemic really sort of started in the U.S. context, have been able to bring it down to close to zero infection rate. But there are
Mm-hmm.
other states that have a positivity rate exceeding 20%. So, in general, where do you think we are in the
Well,
pandemic?
I think it's difficult to just give a, one answer, one size fits all
Yeah.
answer. I really think that it's just, I mean, the same thing. I mean, you can see what's happening around the world. Different countries have contained it relatively well by really following policies and responding immediately and doing contact tracing. And in the United States, we have 50 states, and it's almost like 50 different programs.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say where we are as a we, but you can see that, and I think that's one of the worrisome things about all this push to reopen schools. Is the question
Mm.
is, how's that going to work out? Are we going to go back to, um, July and June when things were racing out of control? Are we going to go back up to 70,000 new infections a day?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to believe that we're going to avoid it because we don't seem to be doing the things that we need to be doing. Now, I'm not saying everybody's not doing them, but there are enough people not doing them so that it just keeps things alive, I'm afraid.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good point, George. I mean, we have 50 different countries almost, and they have their own policies, but we don't really have travel restrictions. They're not really countries, right? They're states, and so they're behaving as if they're countries from policy perspective, but they're not countries. There is free movement of people from one to the other, which would imply that we will have this disease sort of moving around the entire country for a long time if that's the case.
Yeah, because what we're doing is we're kind of almost keeping it alive, like
Yeah.
we bring it down and then we start opening it up and spreading it again and getting groups of people who weren't infected before infected now. So initially, a lot of this happened, the infection happened in the more populated areas. But now it's beginning to show in the less populated, in the rural areas, much less densely packed. And, when you reopen schools, like especially universities, what are you doing? You're bringing thousands of people from all around the country to one location. Well, that's almost like concentrating the virus.
In very close proximity, yeah, in college campuses,
It's
yeah.
very close. And I know people are blaming students and all that, but really, if you bring thousands of people and house them close to each other, and they're going to interact with the community, I mean, even if they try their best, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's just, because the virus never sleeps.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, exactly like you say, we are keeping it alive.
Yeah. In other words, like you could wear your mask 99 times out of 100.
Yeah.
But that one time that you didn't wear it and you got close to somebody who got it, you could get an infection, and you can't go to the virus and say, look, 99% of the time I was good.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing about these types of compliance measures, right? So it is not a fashion show. Yeah, it really has to be 100% compliance or not.
Well, what it is the model that I point out is a statistical model,
Yeah.
okay, which means that you're making certain assumptions, and what you're trying to do with these various hand washing things and the mask wearing and the social distancing is not that you're saying if you do these things you're going to be 100% safe. What you're saying is that your chance of being infected, instead of maybe being 50%, is going to be 2%.
Right. And if you
Okay.
increase that 2% to 10%, just 10%, it makes a huge difference, right, in the model.
Exactly. That's the point. So what you're trying to do is to tell people, look, you may follow the procedure, but you may still get infected. But on the whole, if we all follow the procedure, many fewer people will get infected, and this thing will die out faster. That's really the trade-off. You're not saying, oh, you follow the procedure, because we all slip. Like, I mean, you notice, you watch people wearing their mask.
Yeah.
It's surprising how many people have their mask on, but their nose is above the mask.
Right.
Now, those people would say, well, I wore my mask all the time. And the answer is no, because if your nose is on top of the mask,
Yeah.
you're not really being protected by it. And you're not really protecting other people, because if you sneeze, all the stuff is not going to be blocked by the mask. So there's even the simple things that we're asking people to do. A lot of people are not doing them correctly, like even washing your hands. They're trying to tell people wash your hands for 20 seconds, because if you want to kill the virus, it's not going to be killed in 1 second of hand washing. It really, the soap needs time to break down the walls of the virus. So again, if you don't do it or hand wipe, I mean, it's hard to get every square inch of your hand and figure, and the virus just needs a little break. It doesn't need a lot, and so it's very difficult to avoid contact. I mean, even like if you get packages and you want to wipe them down, well, then you have to wipe the doorknobs down. You have to, when you try to open a package that you got, then you use scissors, say, to cut the tape, but then you have to clean the scissors.
Yeah, there is risk everywhere. Hopefully we'll get through this. Yeah, I mean, the bottom line here is that either you get hold of it, like New Zealand or South Korea, or you don't. Having sort of doing it is not going to make a difference. And so that is the predicament that we have currently. We don't have a national policy. We have differing opinions in the country as to whether it's important to do or otherwise. And so we cannot get rid of it by sort of doing it. Is the primary message. Yeah.
20% of the people are not going to wear masks because they think it's ridiculous. Then we're not going to get rid of it. That's what the model tells you. That if you can't control those constants, like, and I make them explicit in the paper, the various constants. You want to get the rate of infections down. You want to get the susceptibility down. Then you have a chance of it kind of plateauing at some point. If you can't control it, eventually everybody's going to get it.
Right.
Now, if there's a vaccine and it's effective and people take it, then again, you affect the infection rate. Now, one of the things that I talk about in the paper, which was unclear, was whether once you're recovered, you stay recovered. And now there's some evidence that people can get reinfected. So there's not only can you go from susceptible to infectious to recovered, but some of the recovered people can come back to the susceptible category.
Right.
Okay, so that complicates the model. And again, you can make your assumptions, and I encourage people to play with these models and make their own assumptions and see what the scenarios are. Well, we have this habit of debating all these results, but people don't want to use models. I think if everybody who got up there and had an opinion had to give a model, we could have much more constructive discussions. We'd say, okay, so what's your model?
Yes.
How are you putting this virus to bed?
Yeah, hopefully the genius of our politicians will help us all to get through this, George.
Well, ultimately, I think it's gonna come down to people, because if people have this experience, they start losing people, or they see other people they care about suffering, possibly dying, it's going to change their opinion. Unfortunately, that's a hard way to learn, but I think eventually people are going to realize that, we have to do stuff that maybe they don't want to do, but that's going to be the answer. Now, of course, if the vaccine comes, that'll help. But again, you're seeing these statistics, 40% of people say they're not going to take the vaccine. So I don't know, this could go on for 10 years.
Yeah, let's hope not. This has been great, George. Thanks so much for spending time with me, and good luck with all this research.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your interest, and always glad to talk to you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.